The text came in at 11:43 at night. I was still in the kitchen, rinsing out my coffee mug, when my phone buzzed on the counter. Marcus, my son. I dried my hands and picked it up. Dad, you need to turn on channel 4. I frowned at the screen. Marcus never texted me that late. Not unless something was wrong. I walked into the living room, found the remote wedged between the couch cushions where it always ended up, and clicked on the television. For a moment, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I did. And I had to sit down. 3 days earlier, I was at my kitchen table in Knoxville, Tennessee, doing what retired men do on a Tuesday morning in November. Drinking coffee that had gone cold. Staring out the window at the oak tree I'd been meaning to trim for 2 years, pretending I wasn't lonely. My name is Robert. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working for the county roads department, mostly supervising crews, mostly outdoors, mostly covered in dirt or rain or both. I retired 3 years ago and discovered something nobody warned me about. Retirement is quiet in a way that gets louder the longer you sit in it. My wife Carol passed away 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to gone. That's a different story, and not mine to tell here, except to say that when you lose someone like that, you either figure out how to rebuild yourself from scratch, or you don't. I did. Slowly. Badly at first, but I did. After Carol, it was Marcus who kept me standing. He was 26 when she died, already living in Asheville with his girlfriend, Diane, who became his wife 2 years later. They have a daughter now, Sophie, 8 years old, brown hair, missing one front tooth. Thinks her grandfather hung the moon, or at least she used to. Marcus and I had always been close. He was the kind of kid who actually called on Sunday, who showed up to help when I replaced the water heater, who sent me pictures of Sophie without me having to ask. After Carol died, he started driving down to Knoxville once a month, just to check on me, just to sit in the driveway and talk about nothing. That was before Diane's father moved to Asheville. His name was Ted. I didn't have anything against Ted, which is what I kept telling myself whenever I noticed his name coming up more and more in conversations. Ted had retired early from some kind of financial consulting business. He had money, strong opinions about college football, and the particular confidence of a man who had never once doubted that his way of doing things was the right way. I'm not saying Ted was a bad person. He wasn't. He was just the kind of man who fills up a room without meaning to, the kind of man around whom other people instinctively become smaller. After Ted moved to Asheville, the monthly drives to Knoxville became every 6 weeks, then every 2 months, then just holidays. I told myself that was fine. Children grow up, families evolve. I wasn't going to be the kind of father who made his son feel guilty for living his life. So when Marcus called that Tuesday in November, I smiled when I saw his name. "Hey, son." "Hey, Dad." His voice was careful. I know that voice. I've known it since he was 9 years old and broke the garage window with a baseball. "Everything okay?" Yeah. I wanted to talk to you about Thanksgiving." I set my coffee mug down. "Okay." A pause. The kind that means the next sentence has been rehearsed. Diane's family is all coming in this year. Her sister, her brother-in-law, the cousins, and Ted, obviously. It's going to be a full house. "Sounds nice," I said, because it did, or because I was trying to believe it did. "The thing is, Dad," he stopped, started again. Ted kind of had this idea about it being a Diane side of the family Thanksgiving, just to make everyone feel more comfortable, more connected. You know, I looked out at the oak tree. A crow had landed on one of the high branches and was watching me through the window. Ted had this idea. Yeah. I let the silence sit for a moment. "And what do you think about it?" Another pause. Shorter this time, which told me more than the words that followed. "I think it makes sense this year. Sophie's been really bonding with the cousins, and Ted, he's been a little down lately, since moving. I think it would mean a lot to him." I almost said something then. The words were right there. What about what would mean a lot to me? But I swallowed them. "I understand," I said. "Dad, no, I mean it. I understand." The lie came out quiet and smooth, the way lies do, when you've had enough practice being polite. You go have a good Thanksgiving with everyone. "I'll call you that morning." "Sure, and we'll figure out a time to come down in December." "Sounds good." We hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The crow was gone from the oak tree. The coffee was completely cold. The house made the small sounds houses make when there's only one person in them. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I thought I would be, but anger requires energy. And what I mostly felt was tired. Tired and invisible. Like I'd been standing in the same spot for years, and at some point everyone had simply stopped noticing I was there. That evening, I drove to the grocery store and bought everything I needed to make Thanksgiving dinner. Turkey, the good kind, sweet potatoes, green beans, a bag of cranberries I'd make into sauce from scratch the way Carol used to, a decent bottle of bourbon for after. If I was going to spend Thanksgiving alone, I was going to do it right. Over the next 2 days, I also put together a box for Sophie. Not expensive things. A bird identification book, because she'd told me last summer she wanted to learn what all the birds at my feeder were called. A little journal with a green cover. A small pair of binoculars. I wrapped everything carefully and wrote her name on the outside. I told myself I'd mail it. I told myself a lot of things that week. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of Tennessee November day that can't decide whether it wants to rain or just threaten to. I woke up early, made coffee, fed the birds, watched a pair of chickadees argue over the suet cage. Marcus called at 9, just like he'd promised. We talked for 12 minutes. He sounded distracted. Ted was already there, apparently. Something about an early morning football argument had the whole house loud. Sophie got on briefly and told me she'd lost the other front tooth. I laughed and told her the tooth fairy was probably getting rich off her. She giggled. Then Diane called her away, and Marcus came back and said, "Love you, Dad." And I said, "Love you too." And that was that. I cooked the whole meal anyway. The turkey came out better than it had any right to, which felt like a small cruelty. The sweet potatoes were good. The cranberry sauce was exactly how Carol made it. I set the table for one and ate in the kitchen instead, because sitting at the dining room table alone felt like something I wasn't ready for. After lunch, I washed the dishes, packed up the leftovers, and sat down on the couch with the intention of watching football. Instead, I found myself looking at the box I'd made for Sophie. I'd wrapped it, put a bow on it, set it by the front door to mail. I stared at it for a long time. Then I got up, put on my jacket, and carried the box to my truck. I drove 2 hours to Asheville. I told myself I wasn't going to knock on the door. I told myself I was only going to leave the box on the porch, ring the bell, and go. No scene, no guilt trip, just a grandfather dropping off a gift because that's what grandfathers do. In and out. Nobody would even have to know it was me. What I did not account for was the weather. About 40 minutes outside of Asheville, the rain that had been threatening all day finally made up its mind. It came down hard and fast, the kind of rain that turns mountain roads slick before you realize what's happening. My wipers were going full speed. Visibility dropped. I slowed down. I was on a 2-lane stretch of Route 70, the old highway, when I saw the lights. A car had gone off the road about 100 yards ahead. Not a catastrophic crash, but bad enough. The vehicle had slid off the shoulder and down a short embankment, landing nose first against a tree line. Hazard lights were flashing. Nobody was coming from the other direction. I pulled over without thinking about it. That's the thing about 31 years in road work. You don't deliberate, you just stop. I called 911, gave them the mile marker, and got out into the rain. The car was a silver Accord. The front end had crumpled against a tree trunk, not catastrophically, but the airbags had deployed. Steam was rising from under the hood. I scrambled down the embankment, my boots sliding in the wet grass, grabbed onto a fence post to steady myself. Inside the car were 2 people. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, in the driver's seat. And in the back, strapped into a car seat, a little boy. Couldn't have been more than 3. The woman was conscious but dazed. A cut above her eyebrow was bleeding down the side of her face. The boy was crying, which meant he was breathing, which was the most important thing. "Ma'am, don't move. Help is coming." I said it the same way I'd learned to say things at accident scenes over the years. Calm voice, not too fast. Certainty you don't entirely feel. "My son," she said. "Is he?" "He's okay. He's crying, which is good. Just stay still." I stood in the rain and kept talking to her until the fire department arrived. Kept her focused on my voice. Kept her from trying to turn around and reach for the boy, which would have been the wrong movement. When the EMTs came down the embankment, I stepped back and let them work. That's what you do. The firefighter who came up beside me was maybe 30. He looked at me soaking wet, mud on my boots, blood on my jacket sleeve from where I'd braced myself against the car door. You the one who called it in? Yes. You know them? No. I was just passing. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded, the way men nod when they respect something but don't know how to say it. A few minutes later, a local TV news van pulled up. Of course it did. Holidays and bad weather and crashes on the highway, that's a news story. A young reporter with an umbrella came down the embankment and started filming the scene. EMTs loading the mother onto a stretcher. A firefighter carrying the little boy who had stopped crying and was now looking around at everything with enormous, curious eyes. The reporter found me standing at the edge of things, trying to wipe the rain off my face. Were you involved in the accident? No. I stopped to help. Can I ask your name? Robert Calloway. She asked a few more questions. I answered them. I was cold and tired and mostly thinking about whether there was any point in continuing to Asheville now that it was getting dark and the rain wasn't letting up. I wasn't paying much attention to the camera. At some point, the reporter asked a question that I registered somewhere in the back of my brain as not quite what I expected. Do you have family waiting for you tonight? It's Thanksgiving. I looked at her for a second. The camera was right there. The rain was coming down sideways. My son's family is in Asheville, I said, but I wasn't invited this year. She blinked. I'm sorry? It was a family thing. I almost stopped there. I should have stopped there. But something in me was too wet and too tired for careful. My son's father-in-law needed it to be his kind of Thanksgiving, so I spent mine alone. Then I figured I'd drop something off for my granddaughter. I gestured vaguely at my truck up on the shoulder. I had a box in the car. The reporter stared at me. The camera kept rolling. That's why you were on this road tonight? That's why I was on this road tonight. She looked like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she just nodded and thanked me and walked back toward the van. I didn't think about it again until my phone started going off at 11:43 that night. I was back home in Knoxville by then, having turned around after talking to the EMTs, driven home in the dark rain, and eaten leftover turkey standing over the kitchen sink. I was running the water when the first text came in from Marcus. Dad, you need to turn on channel 4. Then 3 more in quick succession, then a missed call. Then another text, Dad, please call me. I found the remote, turned on the TV, and sat down hard on the couch. The news station was running the Thanksgiving night recap segment. Traffic, weather, holiday events. And then, right there on the screen, me, standing in the rain beside a crumpled silver Accord, talking to a reporter with an umbrella, looking exactly as old and wet and tired as I'd felt. The clip they chose wasn't the rescue. It wasn't the firefighters or the EMTs or the young mother. It was just me, standing in the rain, saying, my son's father-in-law needed it to be his kind of Thanksgiving, so I spent mine alone. Then I figured I'd drop something off for my granddaughter. 12 seconds. That was the whole clip. My phone rang. Marcus, Dad, I see it. Why didn't you tell me you were coming up? I wasn't going to knock on the door. I was just going to leave Sophie's box. Silence on the line. A long one. You drove 2 hours in the rain to leave a box on my porch. She lost her other front tooth. I had something for her. More silence. And then I heard it not crying exactly, but the sound of someone trying very hard not to. Dad, I didn't know. I know you didn't. I should have. Marcus, I said it quietly. It's all right. Get some sleep. It's not all right. It will be. Good night, son. I hung up and sat in the quiet living room with the television still on, replaying the clip again on a different channel now. Then another channel. I turned it off and sat in the dark. After a while, I went to bed, but I lay there staring at the ceiling for a long time. Not angry, not even sad exactly, just awake with the strange feeling of being seen by everyone except the people you most wanted to see you. By Friday morning, my phone had become something I didn't recognize. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. A guy I used to coach Little League with 20 years ago. The woman who'd lived next door before I moved. 3 former coworkers from the roads department. All variations of the same thing. Saw you on the news. Glad you're okay. Hell of a thing. And underneath all of it, the faint, uncomfortable warmth of being noticed. Marcus drove down Saturday morning. Alone. No Diane, no Sophie, no Ted. Just him. He knocked on my door at 9 a.m., holding a bag of donuts from a place in Asheville I used to love, which told me he'd been planning this since at least the night before. We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't say much at first, just drank his coffee and looked at the oak tree out the window. Finally, he said, "I should have said no." I waited. When Ted brought it up, I should have just said no. It's my house, my wife, my kid. I could have said my dad comes to Thanksgiving. That's not a discussion. He set down his mug. I didn't. Why not? He thought about it, actually thought about it, which I appreciated. Because it felt easier to manage you than to manage them. That landed in the room between us and just sat there. "I know that's not something you want to hear," he said. "No." I agreed. "But it's true, so I'd rather hear it than not." He looked at me. "How are you not angrier?" I was angry, I said. I cooked an entire Thanksgiving dinner by myself and was angry the whole time. "Good turkey, though. You want some? It's in the freezer." He laughed. It was a short laugh, a surprised one, the kind that happens before you can stop it. Then he got serious again. "I'm sorry, Dad. Really?" I nodded. "I know you are. Can we fix it?" I looked at my son. He was 40, but right then he looked about 14. Same expression he'd had when he was a kid and knew he'd done something wrong and was waiting to find out what it would cost him. "That depends on what fixing it means," I said. "If it means going back to the way things were a few years ago, where you drove down once a month and we sat in the driveway and talked about nothing, yeah, I think we can get there. But not in one Saturday morning. Okay. And Ted doesn't get to decide who comes to Thanksgiving. That's done. Okay. Those are my terms." He picked up his coffee. "Those are fair terms." We finished the donuts. He helped me bring in a quart of firewood from the back. We watched part of a game. Around 3 o'clock, he drove back to Asheville. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no dramatic speech, no tearful collapse. Just two people acknowledging the truth of a situation and deciding, slowly and imperfectly, to do better, which is usually how repair actually works, if you've lived long enough to know. What I didn't expect was what came after. The clip kept circulating online through the weekend. By Monday, it had reached some national news aggregator, one of those websites that rounds up human interest stories. By Tuesday, my county supervisor had left a voicemail. By Wednesday, the local VFW chapter, which I'd done some work with over the years, reached out about something called the Community Pillar Recognition, an annual dinner they held in January for people who had contributed quietly to the area. My name apparently had come up. I told them I'd think about it. Then a woman named Patricia Horn, who directed a nonprofit that did home repair work for elderly and disabled residents. Places I'd volunteered a handful of times called to say she'd been getting donations all week from people who'd seen the story and looked up local nonprofits in Knoxville. She credited me. I told her she should credit the algorithm. She laughed and told me to attend the January dinner. I went, mostly because Patricia asked me twice and I didn't have a good enough excuse the second time. The Civic Center was warmer than I expected and louder than I liked. Round tables with centerpieces, a slide presentation, a local news anchor serving as MC. I found my seat, drank bad coffee, and spent most of the early part of the evening trying to figure out how to leave without being noticed. I was not able to leave without being noticed, partly because my name was on the program, and partly because I spotted Marcus and Diane and Sophie sitting at a table near the back wall. Sophie saw me first. She came across the room at the particular velocity of an 8-year-old who has not yet learned to be restrained in public spaces, and wrapped her arms around my waist before I'd fully registered she was moving. "Grandpa." She set it into my ribs. "Hey, bug." I hugged her back. She smelled like grape juice and something fruity, probably shampoo. When I looked up, Marcus was standing a few feet away, Diane beside him. And slightly behind both of them, with his hands in his pockets and an expression I couldn't quite read, was Ted. Ted looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe the situation made him look that way. He met my eyes for a moment, and then he did something I genuinely did not expect. He said, "Robert, good to see you. Not effusive, not performative, just quiet and direct, the way people speak when they're saying something they actually mean and aren't sure how it will land." "Ted," I said, "good to see you." That was all, but sometimes that's enough. The dinner moved along. Awards for a school teacher, a firefighter, 2 nurses from a free clinic, the director of a food bank. Good people. People who deserved the recognition more than I did. And I told Patricia that when she sat down beside me during the dessert course. You're wrong about that, she said, but I know you're going to keep thinking it, so I'm not going to argue. When they called my name, I walked up to the podium, the way you walk towards something you'd rather avoid but have decided to face anyway. The MC said kind things. The slide behind him showed photos I didn't know had been taken. Me helping reside a house on a Saturday last spring. Me at a food drive back in October. Me standing in the rain on Route 70 on Thanksgiving night. The MC asked me a question. He leaned toward the microphone with the comfortable ease of a man who did this for a living. Robert, when people talk about you, they keep using the same word, quiet. They say you do things quietly. Is that intentional? I looked out at the room, at the tables, at Patricia, who was nodding at me like she was encouraging a nervous student, at Sophie, who had both elbows on the table and her chin in her hands and was watching me with complete seriousness, at Marcus, at Ted, who was looking at his hands. I don't know that it's intentional, I said. When I was working, we had this thing we said. The road doesn't know your name. The pothole doesn't care who fixes it. The work matters. Whether you get the credit doesn't. I paused. But I'll tell you what I didn't expect. I looked down at the podium. I didn't expect that spending Thanksgiving alone would end up here. I didn't expect that driving 2 hours in the rain to leave a box of bird books on my granddaughter's porch would put me on the news. I especially didn't expect any of that to matter to anyone. Silence in the room. I think about the men I know who are in the same situation, divorced or widowed, or just grown into a kind of invisibility that happens somewhere around 60, where you've spent your whole life being useful to people, and then one day you realize the world has sort of moved on without you, and you're not sure anyone noticed you were still standing there. I stopped. I'm not saying this to make anyone feel bad. I'm saying it because it's true, and I think more people in this room know exactly what I mean than would admit it. The room was very quiet. So if you know someone like that, I said, call them. Not on Christmas, not on Thanksgiving, just on a Tuesday. Just to say you remembered. That was all I had. I walked back to my seat. The applause wasn't the loud, explosive kind. It was the kind that builds slowly, the way things do when they come from somewhere real. Sophie grabbed my hand when I sat down. She didn't say anything. She just held on. Afterward, as people were gathering their coats and saying their goodbyes, Ted appeared at my elbow. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the table. I think I owe you an apology, he said. I waited. The Thanksgiving thing, that was my idea, and it wasn't a good one. I was times. He stopped. Tried again. When I moved to Asheville, I was trying to hold on to something. And I did it in a way that cost you something, and I'm sorry for that. I looked at this man, 68 years old, a little lost maybe, in his own retirement, trying to matter to a family that had welcomed him but wasn't quite his, doing it badly the way people do when they're afraid. I appreciate that, I said. I mean it, he nodded, still not quite meeting my eyes. Marcus thinks a lot of you. I know he does. He's a good son. He is. A pause. You did something right. With him. That was the most unexpected thing Ted had said to me in 6 years of knowing him. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just said thank you and let it be. Marcus drove Sophie and me to get ice cream afterward, the three of us in his car. Diane taking Ted back to his place on the other side of town. Sophie ate a whole scoop of mint chip and talked nonstop about the birds she'd been seeing since I'd mailed her the book. Not put it on the porch. She'd gotten the package in the mail. Marcus had mailed it without telling me. I looked at him across the table. He shrugged. She needed the book. There are moments in your life that don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with music or speeches or the particular brightness of a scene that knows it will be remembered. They're just a man and his son and his granddaughter sitting in a booth on a January night eating ice cream, and the granddaughter is explaining the difference between a chickadee and a nuthatch with the authority of someone who has clearly been reading very carefully. And you think, this is what I was protecting all those months. Not a seat at a table, not a holiday. I got home late. The house was quiet in the way it always is. The bird feeder was empty. I'd have to fill it in the morning. The oak tree I'd been meaning to trim for 2 years stood dark and still against the sky. I sat down in my chair. Not sad, not triumphant, just present, just here. My phone buzzed once. A text from Marcus. Thanks for tonight, Dad. Love you. I set the phone down on the side table without answering. Not because I didn't care, Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to answer right away. I wasn't afraid the moment would disappear if I didn't reach for it fast enough. That's the thing about learning your own worth. Nobody hands it to you. You find it yourself, usually in the last place you thought to look, alone in a kitchen on Thanksgiving, or standing in the rain on a dark highway, or watching your granddaughter eat ice cream and recite the names of birds. You were always worth the seat. Some people just needed strangers in the rain to remind them. If you've been sitting at the edge of someone else's table for too long, I hope this finds you. You're not invisible. You're just in the wrong room. But the right room is still out there. I promise you that. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't being left out, it's choosing not to beg for a place you've already earned. Robert didn't win his son back by arguing or guilt-tripping. He just kept showing up for the world, quietly and without fanfare, until the people who mattered finally looked up and saw him. If someone has been taking your presence for granted, don't disappear in bitterness, disappear into purpose. That's how you remind them what they're missing. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of warmth and entertainment while carrying a little lesson worth keeping.